Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take a critical stack of sources, pull out the really crucial insights, and we'll give you the knowledge you need without you having to wade through all the jargon. Today, we are wrestling with a really high-stakes ecological and economic paradox. It's coming straight out of the Barents Sea. Our focus is this academic paper, To Have One's Cake and Eat It Too, Managing the Alien Invasive Red King Crab. It's by Falk-Petersen and Claire W. Armstrong. And our mission really is to dissect this core conflict. How do you manage a species that's, an ecological wrecking ball, but at the same time provides massive commercial value? Can we actually maximize the profit while guaranteeing the health of the ecosystem it's damaging?
That really is the quintessential challenge, isn't it? We're talking about the Barents Sea red king crab, Paralithodes campcaticus. Now, this is not a native species at all. It's a textbook alien invasive. It was intentionally introduced way back in the 1960s into the Kola Fjord, and, well, it's spread incredibly quickly along the Norwegian coast since then. So the central conflict this research looks into is whether the management goal of maximum economic yield, MEY they call it.
MEY, right.
Which is purely focused on maximizing the profit you can get from the fishery. Whether that can possibly be reconciled with the necessary overarching Barents Sea management goal, which is securing the structure and the functioning of the natural ecosystem.
Yeah.
They're basically asking, which goal has to give? Can you have both?
Okay, let's start with the cake, as the title says. The immediate, undeniable financial upside. The economic importance of this crab is, well, it's huge.
It is.
Mainly because it fetches such a high market price. It's become a really vital income stream for local coastal economies there in Norway, especially for the small-scale fishers, right? The ones who rely on their allocated quotas. And just to give you a sense of the scale, the total landed value of this crab, just in 2009 alone, was close to 130 million Norwegian kroner.
Yeah, NOK, 130 million.
That's a massive sum. It makes this crab a critical lifeline, really, for those small coastal communities that depend so much on fishing revenue.
But that lifeline comes at a pretty significant cost. And it seems to be escalating. We can break the cost down into maybe two categories.
Okay.
First, there's the direct nuisance to the traditional fisheries. The crab is just notorious for getting tangled up in cod gill nets. So fishers have higher gear maintenance, replacement costs.
Hassle and expense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe even worse, it's a pest that eats the catch and the bait.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Estimates show the crab might be responsible for consuming something like 40% of the bait in line fisheries.
30%?
40%. And maybe up to 10% of the actual catch in some areas.
Wow.
So this forces the traditional fishers to burn extra fuel just trying to find clean, crab-free fishing grounds. That adds a kind of hidden operational cost to your whole business.
Okay, so we've got the visible financial cost to the fishers. But the paper also really highlights this much more profound, maybe long-term threat, the ecological impact. What exactly is this thing doing down there on the seafloor? It's described as a generalist predator.
That's right. And it's fundamentally altering the benthic community structure. That's the life on the seabed.
Okay.
The crab's feeding habits, they cause a reduction in the biomass, so the total weight of living stuff, and the diversity, the variety of large epibenthic organisms. Things like bivalves, clams and mussels, and echinoderms like sea stars and urchins.
So it's basically clearing the floor.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
Simplifying that complex bottom environment.
And it's not just, like, obscure invertebrates being cleared out, is it? The source seemed pretty clear that the crab preys on species that are really crucial to how the ecosystem functions.
Exactly, like the Icelandic scallop. Scallop beds are important nursery areas for other species. And critically, they also eat the eggs of key commercial fish species.
Which ones?
Specifically capelin and the Arctic lumpsucker.
Ugh, capelin. That's a big one in the Barents seafood web, isn't it?
It's the cornerstone.
Yeah.
Absolutely fundamental. It supports everything from cod to whales. So when the crab impacts these foundational species and their nursery habitats, it doesn't just reduce biodiversity.
Right.
It actively disrupts the ecosystem's supporting services. It threatens the whole productivity chain, potentially.
Okay, let's unpack this then. This seems like the core tension. You've got this massive, clear financial gain, right, sitting directly opposite this complex, compounding, maybe escalating ecological cost. So the challenge then must be to try and assign some kind of numerical value to that whole spectrum of damage from the daily extra fuel cost all the way up to the potentially catastrophic cost of losing biodiversity, and then weigh that against the profit from the crab itself.
That is precisely what the authors set out to do. They developed and applied a bioeconomic model. They focused specifically on the Varanger Fjord, which is in the Eastern Management Zone out there.
Okay.
And the model, it focuses on this really delicate relationship between the size of the invasive stock, they call that X, and the resulting damages, which they denote as N.
Got it. X is the number of crabs, N is the damage they cause.
Basically, yes. And their data gave them some key baselines for that Varanger Fjord area. They estimated that the traditional fisheries there yielded a net benefit of about 1.7 million Norwegian kroner. That's before you count any crab profits.
Okay, so the value of the old fishery.
Right. And the biological carrying capacity, that's K, the theoretical maximum number of crabs the environment could sustain.
Yeah.
They estimated that at around 3 million legal male crabs.
3 million. Okay. Now, here's where, for me, it got really interesting, because the real-world connection between how many crabs there are and when or if the ecosystem might collapse, well, that's unknown, right? We just don't know where that tipping point is.
Exactly. Huge uncertainty there.
So they couldn't just use a single formula. They had to model 3 fundamentally different ways that the damage could pile up just to cover that massive uncertainty.
That's exactly right. They developed 3 distinct cases to reflect just how quickly that ecological cost curve might climb.
Right.
So case I, this assumed linear damage. You could call this the sort of optimistic view.
Okay.
Damage things like gear replacement, lost bait. It just increases steadily, proportionally, as the crab population grows. It assumes a relatively smooth, kind of predictable, manageable cost curve.
So case I is the comfortable, predictable world where costs just go up in a straight line, but then you have the riskier scenarios.
Precisely. Case I was the, let's say, the more alarming one, exponential damage.
Exponential.
This assumes that the damage accelerates rapidly because, biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, it rarely happens in a nice straight line.
Tipping points.
Exactly. Once certain ecological thresholds are crossed, native communities can crash really quickly, potentially leading to irreversible changes. So this represents a future where costs could suddenly skyrocket.
Okay, that sounds potentially catastrophic. And then there was case 3.
Yes. Case 3 introduced a specific ecological limit. They called it the knife edge threshold.
A red line.
A red line, basically. It assumes that once the crab population hits a specific size, they call this T, the ecosystem enters an undesirable state. A state where the losses become socially unacceptable, and the goal have to shift away from profit towards its preservation.
And did they put a number on that threshold, T?
They did. Based on observations of the initial ecosystem changes they saw around 1999, they set this crucial red line threshold, T, at 822,500 legal male crabs.
822,500.
Okay. So in this scenario, the model simply is not allowed to recommend a stock size above that point. It's a hard stop.
Okay, right. Let's look at the results then. This is where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? The optimal stock size, that's X, the population level, that theoretically maximizes the benefit minus the damage. How did that change across these 3 possible realities?
Well, it changed dramatically, hugely.
Okay.
So under the simple optimistic case I linear damage, the optimal stock size X came out at 1.166 million individuals.
Okay, over 1 million crabs?
Yes. Then under case 3rd, knife edge threshold, remember, it couldn't go above the limit. So the optimal size was forced down to that defined threshold, 822,500 individuals.
Right, it hits the ceiling.
It hits the ceiling. But then, under case 2, the exponential damage model, the optimal stock size absolutely plummeted.
Hello.
Down to a mere 146,586 individuals.
Wait, 146,000 compared to over 1 million in the linear case?
Exactly, almost 10 times smaller.
That difference is measured in literally millions of crabs.
Yeah.
And it represents this stark choice, doesn't it, between maximizing immediate profit, like in case 8, and potentially preserving the ecosystem, like in case 2, suggests you need to.
The conclusion is pretty much undeniable from their analysis. The management goal of MEY, maximum economic yield, which inherently requires a high profitable crab population like that 1.166 million figure, is fundamentally incompatible with the goal of securing ecosystem structure, especially if that exponential damage function case 2 turns out to be closer to the ecological reality.
Because the costs just climb too steeply, too fast.
Precisely. Maximizing that short-term profit in that scenario leads directly towards long-term ecological ruin.
And what's really fascinating here, you mentioned this paper had real-world impact.
It did. This analysis seems to have provided the key quantitative insight that led to a really dramatic shift in the official management advice back in 2010.
How so?
Well, before this paper, the advice was pretty much purely focused on MEY, maximize the crab catch value.
Okay.
Afterwards, the advice became twofold. It was essentially, look, you can either manage for MEY or you need to actively reduce the population to the lowest possible level specifically to protect the benthic communities. It acknowledged the conflict.
So the science directly changed the policy options on the table.
It appears so.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the sensitivity of the entire policy decision to what we don't know. While the results were pretty robust overall, that optimal size for case 2, the exponential damage one.
The really low number, 146,000.
Yeah, that one was highly sensitive to the assumed intrinsic growth rate of the crab, basically how fast the population can bounce back or grow. Meaning, if the crabs reproduce just slightly faster than the model assumed, that optimal preservation target of 146,000 crabs, it changes immediately. It could be even lower.
Wow. So this finding, it creates this massive challenge for the resource managers, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It seems imperative to establish which damage function is correct, linear, exponential, or that threshold model, because the choice determines whether you aim for, over 1 million crabs or maybe closer to 150,000. Those are vastly different targets.
They are. And we also have to acknowledge the limitations of the model itself, because they strongly suggest the real ecological cost is likely far greater than even these models estimated.
Oh, how so?
Well, for instance, that net benefit figure they used as a baseline, the A value, it only included the profit from traditional fisheries.
Right, the NOK 1.7 million.
Yes, but that's likely a massive underestimation of the total value provided by the native ranger ecosystem. Think about all the other services. Cultural value, regulating services like water quality, and those crucial supporting services for the whole food web.
Yeah, the financial value of a stable, functioning marine ecosystem is probably huge, but hard to quantify.
Extremely hard. That's a serious understatement, probably. But here's another big one, maybe even more concerning from a methodology standpoint.
Okay.
The model excluded female and juvenile crabs entirely.
It only modeled legal-sized males.
That's right. And the source itself points out that juvenile crabs make up something like 80% of the entire crab population.
80%.
And crucially, they have higher consumption rates per unit of biomass than the adults do. They eat more for their size.
Okay, hold on. If 80% of the population, the hungriest part, isn't even included in the analysis, how much faith can we really put into these optimal numbers?
That's the critical question, isn't it?
Doesn't that strongly suggest the real impact is actually much, much greater and the truly safe or optimal population size is actually much lower than even that 146,000 figure from case 2?
It certainly points in that direction. The actual ecological impact is almost certainly significantly greater than estimated because of those excluded juveniles.
Okay.
And there's more. The model treated the Varanger Fjord as a kind of closed box, a self-contained system.
But it's not, presumably.
No, of course not. In reality, crabs migrate. They move around. And the benthic communities, the stuff on the bottom, they're patchy. They're not evenly distributed.
Right.
So this means that local areas, maybe particularly those containing rare or sensitive species, could suffer really severe localized impacts that a broad fjord-wide model might completely miss.
You could have local devastation even if the average looks okay.
Exactly. And if we try and connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
that biological carrying capacity, that they use 3 million legal males,
Yeah.
that maximum estimate might itself be too high if the goal is to maintain ecosystem integrity. There were already signs appearing, things like reduced diversity in some areas, poor recruitment of young crabs, even reports of cannibalism.
Cannibalism.
Among the crabs.
Yes. Which can be a sign of populations under stress, potentially having overshot the environment's actual capacity to support them in a healthy way. So, okay, summing this up, what does this all mean for resource management today looking forward? The paper seems to provide pretty undeniable evidence that the two main goals here are fundamentally contradictory.
It really does seem that way.
Economically maximizing this profitable invasive species and ecologically maintaining the structure and integrity of the ecosystem it invaded, you just can't seem to do both effectively in the Barents Sea.
That's the stark conclusion.
Yeah.
And it suggests that knowledge is most valuable when it's, understood and actually applied.
Right.
Future research really needs to stop trying to just define the maximum number of crabs you can harvest.
Right.
And instead, maybe focus on defining the true ecological carrying capacity, not just for the crab, but for the whole environment. What level can the Barents Sea ecosystem actually handle without starting to unravel?
That sounds like a much harder question to answer.
It is. And establishing the exact shape of that nonlinear damage function is exponential. Is there a sharp threshold caused by the entire crab population, importantly including those high-impact juveniles?
Yeah.
That's absolutely essential.
We need to know how steep that cliff is and where it starts.
Precisely. And that leaves us, and you the listener, with a final kind of provocative thought to consider. While this paper clearly shows the dramatic ecosystem changes already happening, the full long-term costs, they're still largely unknown.
Especially things like the indirect impacts, right? On those crucial commercial fish stocks like cod and haddock, which ultimately depend on the health of those benthic communities the crabs are altering.
Exactly. We don't know how that plays out over decades. So the really big question becomes, if these ecosystem changes turn out to be largely irreversible, what level of environmental damage, what level of loss is socially, politically, and ethically acceptable?
Especially when weighed against that significant economic benefit, at least in the short term. That remains the monumental, open-ended challenge here, doesn't it?
That certainly does. A classic wicked problem.